for a steroid like this would probably be 6 with a less recovery period in between. And then if you're asking me, how long do they maintain that benefit? Well, clearly when they stop, it starts titrating down where they don't maintain that benefit. You can't just do a 6-week cycle of steroids, build up to whatever physical level you want to get to, and then just maintain that workload without the drug and keep all those gains. It doesn't work like that. And so if you're asking me, you know, I can't give you an exact time period, but we're probably talking a few months after cessation.
And that's a key question, I think, for me in this, is that if I take oral Nurmagomedov, even assuming I took it for a 6-week cycle, and I stopped, performance-enhancing effect could possibly last a couple of months post the last ingestion. And then at that point, even though the M3 metabolite might show up sooner, or only the M3 metabolite might show up sooner, there still might be some benefit another month or two past that.
You know, I agree with everything you said until you said about the M3 still being around that is offering some kind of ergogenic aid. There's no evidence that that metabolite is performance enhancing. Clearly the parent is.
Understood. So I'm thinking about it in my mind, the way I think about things is kind of like a graph. You know, if I take oral Nurmagomedov on a 6-week basis, and I work out and I recover faster, I get stronger, I'm able to do more, which obviously gives me the benefit. And on day 45, I stop taking oral Nurmagomedov. According to what we're talking about here, 1 month later, the only thing that will show up in my test results, if I said that wrong, would be the M3 metabolite. The oral Nurmagomedov and the short-term metabolites, and this is roundabout, would be gone. But I would still have a benefit that 30 days later. As I'm coming off of not being able to use this, the strength that I had built for that 6-week period is still there for me about 60 days later. And then at that point, I would be kind of back to normal.
I think that's fair, but the only thing that I would challenge you on is that
I'm not making statements that are big questions.
No, sorry, Mr. Chairman, but I would argue that the intermediate metabolites that were identified in the Sobolevsky and Rychenkov paper would be detected for longer than a 4-week period. And so if you have, you know, 3 or 4 week period for the parent, the short term, and then you have the intermediate period that might be detectable for several months,
okay,
and then only the M3 after that certain period of time. So you know, we've got a few month window. I think that's conservative, that we know if they've used within that 3-month period, just because we should see some of these intermediate metabolites.
So if we're not seeing the intermediate metabolite, and all we're seeing is the M3 metabolite, for a period of 6 months, is it safe to say that the athlete has no performance-enhancing effect from the original ingestion? I
agree with that statement.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier that when he failed the July 28, 17 test, I think someone said how many days prior to that failed test had he ingested the drug? And you said, well, a while. So I understand that, but in your opinion, he has not ingested this drug since, not knowing when he took it, but you know for sure since July 28th of 2017 would be your professional opinion?
I think it's very important, you know, when I use the word that I see no evidence, and so I see no evidence of use after that. I mean, that's all I can really tell you, is that I've seen no evidence that it's been any exposure or administration after that.
Since the July 2017 failed test, and we don't know how many days prior to that he did take it.
Or how long he was taken for, or the route of administration.
Since then.
That's correct.
In your opinion?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Just for the record, I think your statement was that the performance-enhancing benefit would last 3 months. I think the chairman was saying 60 days, so I just have you clarify that.
You know, I was trying to be conservative, and I think that we were overlapping, you know, during the administration period as well. So if you added that on, you know, to the cessation period, then, you know, I think if you said a 2 or 3 month period total, then I think that'd be conservative, where you still have an ergogenic.
Yeah, and I think that Commissioner McGregor might, sorry for my my wave of timelines and stuff, but if all we saw, the real question to me was, if all we saw was the M3 metabolite in the testing for a 6-month period, no midterm, no short term, and no original oral turinabol, can we say with a high degree of certainty that there is no performance enhancing benefit? Because the evidence of re-ingestion of oral turinabol and the short-term and mid-term metabolites is not there. So all we're seeing is M3, which would imply that this compound was taken quite a while ago, farther back than the timeline I laid out of a 6-week cycle and 60 days of benefit. So what I'm trying to get to is that I have the same concern you do on the 10-month lapse. You know, and if you think about the 10-month lapse based on the evidence, it's absolutely possible, which he said he could have ingested at that time. We have no idea. So, but what we do know is from the point of around August of 18 until today, the longest he has not been tested is 32 days. Sometimes it's daily, sometimes it's weekly, and sometimes it's been bi-weekly. So based on what we know and what we're hearing, I kind of look at that time frame as a period as it pertains to residual performance enhancement as kind of the time frame that we can look at with some certainty. By no means absolute, but some more certainty than looking at this all the way back to the 17th day. I'll turn it over to you to keep going.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I'd like to have Dr. Eigner talk a little bit more about this intermediate term metabolite, because I think we've established that parent drug, several days out of the system, short-term metabolites 1 to 2 weeks. We're vague about this midterm metabolite. We know the M3 can go way out. So are all 3 of the North American WADA certified labs testing for this intermediate metabolite, and what do we think the maximum time of detection of that is? Just wanting to be clear on the record what we're dealing with here as we kind of contemplate how to go forward.
Yeah, thank you for that. The reason why I was vague on the intermediate metabolite detection is that we don't know. And so, you know, is it a few months? Is it 6 months? Not sure. Yeah, that's deliberately vague because we don't know on that one now. You know, the reference material that's available for all the WADA accredited laboratories, there's not reference material for every single analyte for ultra-anabolic, and so all we could rely upon is using an excretion study. So we could use it to identify, but then we couldn't give you a close approximate concentration. You need reference material, certified reference material, to be able to give you an approximate concentration, because you've got to be able to compare it with the known value of something else. And we have that for the M3. We don't have it for all the other metabolites. So all we would be doing is identifying it and confirming it, and then we wouldn't really be able to give you a good estimate on what that concentration was. So there's a lot more that needs to be known about that. But again, coming back to what the lab's job usually is to identify the best way to detect a substance. And so you don't necessarily have every known analyte or metabolite in the screen for these things. My understanding is that the 3 North American labs are world leaders in this area and are probably looking for more analytes than a lot of other labs around the world for this kind of work.
But for the purposes of trying to have the highest confidence level that re-administration or re-ingestion was not actually taking place, and with the uncertainty around the intermediate metabolites, and we know that the M3 is going to be a long metabolite, is the certainty greatest around the short-term metabolites? Our confidence that that is a 1 to 2 week window, that we're pretty confident that it would represent recent use?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So, expanding on that, if the grains of salt in the Olympic swimming pool went up to even 100, 200, 500 picograms, but stayed as only indicating M3 only, your expert opinion is that it would not be reingestion, even though the picogram levels are higher?
I think that, you know, you're going to get to a concentration where I'm going to say this doesn't look like residual. I would like to see evidence of other metabolites in there as well. That would give you the most confidence to say this is absolutely, you know, re-administration. But I think you will get to a concentration either of the M3 metabolite where I would say this looks a little unusual and it may be, you know, re-administration as to a residual.
Okay, thank you.
But I think that's a very important point, because what you're essentially saying is each test, each M3 metabolite level needs to be evaluated independently, and we can't make a blanket statement that any M3 metabolite after the first offense that shows up in a potential fighter is residual.
I concur 100%.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman Martinell mentioned the frequency with which Mr. Jones has been tested. Would you have any comment, observations, opine on that, on the testing cycle, the method being used? Do you think it's the best in the world that he's currently undergoing?
I think from the lab perspective, you know, more is more. You know, more data, the better for me to be able to make an interpretation like this. I think the frequency is on the high end of individuals. I think this athlete has been tested a lot compared to other athletes in other sports. I would also like to make it clear that the reference material that we're using to give you an approximate concentration of the M3 metabolite is newly made. And so I believe there may even be information on the table here that predated the reference material, and so we may only be giving you a really approximate concentration. I'm not too sure on the actual dates there, but I think that over-interpreting slight fluctuations in very low concentrations is dangerous.
Thank you.
Doctor, if I can be so bold as to ask you this, if you would, I really appreciate your expertise on this. You're opening a lot of eyes and answering a lot of questions for us. If Jon were to test today and the results were the same between 33 and 80 picograms, okay, would you, would that be residual effect from the previous? I mean, would you assume, I know it's an assumption, I hear you, and I'm not trying to pin it, but I'm just saying, because of picograms being from 33 to 80, which is where the line is here, would you assume?
I would probably be stronger, because if he was tested, the athlete was tested a week ago, and then a week later, he only has the M3 metabolite, as opposed to being negative a week ago, I would be stronger in saying there's zero evidence that he's reused in that short period, because we know with more confidence the detection window of the parent and the short-term metabolite. So I would be stronger on that one there, but if it comes down to it, my opinion clearly wouldn't change. There'd be no evidence of re-administration.
Thank you.
I have a question that you're not going to answer, but I'm going to ask it to you anyway. Based on what you're saying, you know, and again, I think this points back to the evening of December 21st. What I'm hearing you say is that the idea of pulsing and residual has a high degree of probability that it's real, especially in something like this that we don't understand, and you've referenced some other drugs that we do understand and we see it. So it's not, I guess I wanted to talk about that briefly, that, you know, pulsing or residual effect from ingestion long periods of time ago is a real concept. In other words, it's not BS, it's the real deal.
Mr. Chairman, I've been in front of you before, and I hope you've always respected that I am truthful and honest in everything I've always said to you, and I think that we agree that I do that. There is a lot unknown about this substance. We don't know where it's sequestered. We do know that it's detected for a lot longer period than an oral steroid like this structure you would think would be detected for. So if you want to say, are the concentrations at the low level getting towards the limit of detection, the fluctuations we see at those low concentrations, are they real? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so that leads to my second question. It's actually a statement and a question. Is we have tried to introduce consistency into our regulations as it pertains to anti-doping for the time that I've been here. Not only what's on the list, you're accountable for what you're put in your body, strict liability, zero tolerance standard. First offense to fourth offense, what a fighter can expect, no arbitrary and capricious decisions. Settlement agreements can allow for a reduction in those recommended sentences to bring consistency to what all fighters can expect of any type of unarmed combat. But at the same time, and we've held that line as firm as it can be held since the introduction of the, I believe it was the November 16 regulation. And I also remember and recall when I got here, we were at the end of the era of the TUE, mass abuse on the TUE. And so, how do we deal with this? Because I've always also prided, as well as I know every other commissioner that's been here and chairman before me, of being the gold standard and doing what we can do to be as fair and consistent as we possibly can, but also understanding that the war on drugs and the science on drugs for performance enhancement as it pertains to our athletic realm is changing. It just changed in the hour or two we've had this hearing, and it will continue to change. Do you have any advice, recommendations, or thoughts on how a commission like the Nevada Athletic Commission should look at the idea of pulsing or residual, regardless of the drug, as new science introduces itself? I mean, the safe play is just to stick with the regulation and say, you know, have a nice day. The more aggressive play is to look at the idea of residual as it pertains to certain drugs and certain athletes, and find a way to figure out how to learn more about them and adopt to them. But that can create a web of, it opens Pandora's box, or could, depending on how it's done. You're the foremost expert in the world. We trust you more than anybody in this room today, and always probably will. Do you have any thoughts or advice for the commission as we've asked you our questions on how we should look at ideas like this going forward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the very kind words. I really appreciate that. Obviously, my work is, I work with pee and test tubes. I don't work with policy and regulation.
Don't make it sound so wonderful.
It's fantastic. Come and visit any time. But in all honesty, you know, policy regulation, I mean, like, I don't do that. That I do understand data. And so I think that, as you said, as our knowledge evolves, and I love that word, because we've learned a lot about oral turinabol in the last few years. And if we just stuck at, well, no, this is the way it can only be detected for 50 days, and we just thought like that no matter what, then we wouldn't be doing a good job, because we've got new data that's opened us up. Now our knowledge has evolved as far as how these things, you know, can persist for longer periods of time. I think if you look at other substances that are also prohibited, you know, some of the drugs that can be in cattle, for example, prohibited substances in sport, can you be exposed to that through meat contamination? Yeah, you can. And so my argument to you would be, I would feel these as a case-by-case basis. What's the evidence? And I think that if you identify, you know, the M3 metabolite for the first time, I don't think there's any disagreement that there's been exposure at some time. So that's someone has to answer that. But as far as if you only see the M3 metabolite going forward, I would highly encourage you to do it a case-by-case basis, where you be able to get the data, have a longitudinal evaluation of what you're seeing, and then make an individual-based determination. Because I don't think it's easy enough to say, if you have a concentration above or below this, then this is what happens. I think that's difficult. I think it has to, every case has to be taken individually, and I hope for everyone's sake, including mine, that we don't get a lot of these going forward, but that's what I would propose, even though it's a lengthy process, to look at every individual case and look at the merits of that case. Just like you would on a case that's potentially consistent with meat contamination.
What you said was very interesting. If it's case by case, and it's a first-time M3 metabolite case, then there's an ingestion, obviously ingestion, and obvious accountability that needs to be taken with that ingestion. It's really what happens on this specific drug and this specific metabolite potentially post that original case, and how it's monitored and how the athlete is monitored, and trying to understand that.
Sure.
And I know you don't make policy, and I knew that's why you wouldn't answer my question, but I was curious, and you did kind of give some interesting things to think about, so I appreciate that. Any other questions? Mr. Green, do you have any questions for Dr. Eichner?
I think he's been up here long enough. I certainly don't want to add anything more to his day, so no.
Okay. Dr. Eichner, I appreciate it. Do you have any time constraints? Airplanes or?
My flight's not till 5:30, so I'm around if you need me.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you. Hopefully we won't be here till anytime after 4:45. No, I'm just kidding. God, you guys are a tough group. Okay. Mr. Green, who would you like to bring
I
forward?
propose that we call Dr. Fedoruk next, but I would just maybe suggest with respect to 5-minute break so we can get him on the phone. Make sure that the connection is good so we don't all have to sit here and watch us try to call him.
Do you believe that Dr. Fedoruk would answer the questions any differently as Dr. Eichner did?
Probably not. I mean, I can't really answer that for him, but I know that they were in unison on December 20th in terms of their opinion. And Dr. Fedoruk is an employee of USADA, so he comes at this a little bit differently, and maybe he'll answer those policy questions in a different way since he's...
I think that the policy questions maybe be more appropriate from Mr. Cook that's here today. I don't know. And I don't know. I don't want to not allow you to bring forward whoever you'd like. So if you'd like
I mean, but I don't want to bring in duplicative evidence. I mean, look, we're here today to try to offer up everything the commission feels like it needs. If you don't feel like you need Dr. Fedoruk to testify, we're happy to yield, but I would say I don't think there's any harm in bringing him forward and asking the same questions. If they are duplicative, then they are, but I think that also helps to show we have another opinion of the four here so you can hear it.
Okay. We're certainly going to take a break. Why don't you call him? I think it would be great if you called him and got him on the phone.
Sure.
And you can maybe take the 5, or if you need 10 minutes, and describe what's transpired here. Because I really don't want to ask him the same questions. That
I suggested that he watch on the streaming. I think that it's being streamed, right? I suggested that to Attorney Cook to ask him. So I hope he's watching on the streaming. I don't know.
Why don't you confirm that and see if he concurs, and maybe we do get him on the phone and look for his concurrence in these discussions. If not, and he has anything he'd like to add, I'd certainly like to hear. Has he been on the phone? He has been on the phone the whole time too? Perfect. So why don't you take we'll take the 5-minute break. You can talk to him off on the side. We'll certainly allow him to come in over the phone, see if he has anything he'd like to add, and if not, we'll move to discussions with, I believe, Mr. Cook from USADA.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Well, I'm far from a constitutional scholar, but
Hey, how are you?
nice to meet you. Mike?
How you doing?
Get ready.
All right, good.
First time I saw him, first time I saw
Hey, Mark. Hey, how are you?
long day for you.
Just showing my support.
Yeah. You'll be at the game tonight.
I will be, yeah. What I don't like is an 8 o'clock start. It makes it a real long.
Yeah, I know. You must like that either.
It must be for ESPN.
Yeah, it's just one.
Good, good for
Oh, I got my order for the model vampire jersey. I just wait for the model vampire. It's like I've never asked them for a jersey. That one.
I'll get it all later.
If you've got the hand.
You guys have fun.
The conference is now in this
See, buddy. There are cops out there. I'll have you touch this actually. Keep at it. It's like gloves on. It feels like being back at school. Oh. What it was like for me back to yeah, I walked 5 minutes. I was like, I literally 5 minutes.
I just ate, I hadn't eaten breakfast, so I was like, dude, I had a banana in my car. I was like, yeah. Yeah, exactly. the rest of like the full archive, that's just like, it's great for historical reference and stuff like that, but no one. Yeah. Yeah, just make sure. Sorry. Exactly, yeah. Or they're sort of like, to me, it's good for historical reference or something like that. If you want to go back and not for like, yeah, but not for that. But to just like say like, oh, for entertainment value includes like, I can't tell from the Khabib Jon. Exactly, that's what matters.
What's up, Dallas?
It's blueberry. You got the thrash.
I actually went to go buy some chocolate and I was like, not hand, $1.50 for a Twix.
I got the 5.
Stay away.
I think you got the best camera angle.
Not really. Did you see the back of the
At least they put Jon on the inside.
I'm going to upload it. It's going to take some time.
To you. Please. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah. What, somebody texting you?
No, I'm not.
Merck couldn't.
Sorry?
Merck was only good for his client.
Yeah.
Like,
Good for a lot of
I'll talk to that.
Can't get there.
Okay. All right, we'll pick this back up. Mr. Green, thoughts?
Well, I spoke to Dr. Fedori, and I think it would be helpful to hear from him. He thought that he could potentially comment on some of the policy issues that he had talked about with Dr. Eichner as well.
Okay, so he'd like the opportunity to chime in on some policy.
He would.
Does he have anything that he'd like to talk about as it pertains to science?
Why don't we just give him that opportunity?
Great. So why don't we go ahead and let Dr. Fedori through on the line?
The conference is no longer in listen-only mode.
Dr. Fedoruk, are you on the phone?
I am. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. If you could help us, please state and spell your name for the record.
Sure. My name is Matthew Fedoruk. And the last name is spelled Fedoruk.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to probably take this just a little bit slower to help with the understanding over the intercom system and for the court reporter to be able to gather exactly what you're saying. So I'm going to turn it over to you. It's good that you were able to listen in on the questions and answers with Dr. Eichner. And I would allow you to maybe add some comments or testimony on any place that you think was not covered, and or if you would like to answer or provide additional testimony to any of the questions that you heard, please feel free to do so. And then when you are done, we may have some additional questions for you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Should I proceed, or Mr. Green, do you have any questions first?
I don't think we have any questions first, though, but your phone is cutting in and out pretty badly. Are you on a cell phone or are you on a landline?
I'm on a cell phone.
Okay, why don't we try, we'll let you comment on whatever you'd like to comment on or add to. If it becomes where we can't understand you, then we're just going to have to, well, I'll go back to you and ask you what you want to do. Because usually that's the case when they're on the phone. So why don't you go ahead and we'll see if we can get through this.
Okay. I had a chance to listen to Dr. Eichner's testimony, and I concur with his opinion, and I think the commissioner did an excellent job of asking the relevant questions. And I concur with Dr. Eichner's answers. I would just like to add that the detection of long-term metabolism isn't limited to just DMT compound in question, but the discovery of long-term metabolites for other anabolic agents has been one of the most important advancements in increasing the detection window of prohibited steroids and anti-doping. With regards to Mr. Jones's passport, and it was mentioned at the beginning of the hearing, the importance of longitudinal samples and looking for signs of doping over time as we collect more samples from an athlete. I would want to testify that both Mr. Jones' steroid passport and his blood passport do not show any signs of doping with anabolic agents. Finally, with regard to the policy question that was asked, I completely agree that every case needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis because every athlete is exposed to different prohibited substances in different ways, and their particular set of circumstances means that the science for each single case has to be analyzed independently rather than making the same type of decisions and coming to a conclusion without all the evidence that pertains to that particular athlete's particular case. I think if you were looking for some direction regarding how to handle an athlete that tests positive and continues to test positive, one of the important things that you can do is continue to conduct testing to demonstrate that the compound is still being seen in residual levels rather than the parent or the short or medium-term metabolites that were discussed. And there's been other cases that we've seen where athletes may continue to test positive for anabolic agents for extended periods of time. And it's no fault of the laboratories. Their job is to detect the substances to their best abilities. And therefore, we need to look at the science in order to make the best possible decisions and the most fair decisions for athletes.
Okay. Thank you for that. Are there any questions from any of the commissioners?
Yeah, the question regarding take this by a case-by-case basis, consider individual circumstances, and let's pay attention to the data. And my question to you is in the situation where you haven't identified the source of the ingestion, how do we ensure that the testing regimen is consistent such that we can make a determination? I think there's a 10-month gap in Mr. Jones's testing protocol that seems like we wouldn't have left that large of a gap, and I'm just not sure how that occurred.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think from a policy perspective, one could perhaps consider a requirement in order to conduct testing at regular intervals in order to monitor an athlete while they're serving a sanction. That is not currently, to my knowledge, a mandatory requirement within various anti-doping programs. So that may be a way to pay more attention during the period after the initial positive and during the sanctioning period to allow for more accurate determination and ensure there's no gaps in an athlete's history in order to be more sure that an athlete is not reusing a particular substance.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for being here on the phone, and we're going to now, unless you have anything else you'd like to offer, Mr. Green has any questions of you, you're more than welcome to stay on the phone, but we'll go ahead and mute the phone again. Is that acceptable?
Thank you very much for your time.
All right, thank you. Okay, great. I think it would be...
The conference is now in listen-only mode.
Mr. Green, I think it would be appropriate to bring forward Mr. Cook from USADA at this point.
Sure.
Unless you disagree.
I think that's completely appropriate.
Okay, let's do that.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning, Mr. Cook. You've already been sworn in, so I think at this part, unless I'm misunderstanding, why don't you've already given us your name, why don't you give us your role at USADA?
Certainly, I'm the Results Management and Investigations Senior Director at USADA.
Okay, great, thank you. So that, I think that would probably be appropriate at your position at USADA for the commission to maybe go about some of its questions as it pertains to policy, as it pertains to how USADA came to maybe some of its determinations in this and those types of things, but not necessarily based on the science, because I'm assuming you're not a PhD in microbiology.
Only a JD.
Oh, well, that's a lot farther than the rest of us got, including Mr. Green, who admitted that out of the gate. So, great. So I'll turn it over to the fellow commissioners, and we'll go about our questioning for Mr. Cook. You want to? I'm a linear thinker, so we'll go left to right. You want to start with me?
Sure.
All right.
I'll do that. I'll kind of stick with the last question, Mr. Cook, on the 10-month gap. Have you considered changing the way USADA would test athletes who tested positive to Ranibol, knowing that this M3 long-term metabolite could be a confusing issue for future commissions?
Yes, as Dr. Fedoruk mentioned, that's an excellent question, and especially in retrospect. Now, knowing what we know about oral Ranibol, which we did not know during that 10-month period, it would have been helpful to have more data points during that period. I'd also note that it was during that period that his case was pending, and USADA was having regular interactions with him. And so at the time, I just want to provide that context for what was going on during that time period. It wasn't as if Mr. Jones was off with no contact with USADA during that time.
But just to be clear, no contact and no tests are two different things, correct?
Great, thank you, Mr. Cook. I have, my questions start out a little bit in line with the notification process of the test results. Was the USADA letter that was signed by you, that was sent on December 6th to notify Mr. Jones of his test results over the course of August, September, October, the first time or the first form of communication of the adverse findings that was provided to Mr. Jones?
Of the August and September results, yes.
Was it the first form of communication on that date to UFC?
In writing, yes.
Okay. Because again, based on the UFC anti-doping policy, and I'll refer to 7.13, because it's in front of me. If the initial review of an adverse and analytical finding caused the adverse Analytical finding, USADA shall promptly and simultaneously give notice to the athlete, UFC, and athletic commission, if applicable. So, you know, I think part of the line of question is because all of this fell, quite honestly, on our laps on December 21st. And were triggered by the initial notification on December 6th, which certainly didn't include the California Athletic Commission prior to their hearing on the 11th. So I don't know if you're prepared to answer my question, but my question is, if there was an adverse finding result in August and an adverse finding, why wasn't there notification? If the anti-doping policy gives guidance that the notice should simultaneously give to the athlete, UFC, I understand at that time there wasn't an athletic commission involved, so I'm removing athletic commission, but UFC and the athlete himself, I'm looking to better understand why there wasn't proper notification at the time of the results.
Are you referring to the timing of the notification?
Yes, I'm referring to the December 6th letter to Mr. Jones notifying him that he had adverse finding test results in August and September did not occur until December 6th.
I understand. This brings me actually back to the chairman's opening remarks, in which he mentioned that he is here and wants to do the right thing. And I want to reiterate to the commissioners that that is what I come to USADA every day to do as well. I was a federal prosecutor before joining USADA, and I took pride in coming to work every day in that role and in my role at USADA to do the right thing. And so when we got the results from Mr. Jones's test in August and September, like we do every day, we tried to figure out what to do and what the right thing to do is. And during that time is when we were growing in our understanding of how this metabolite behaves, has been recounted by Dr. Eichner and Dr. Fedora concurred. This knowledge, this research, this was all happening in that span between August, September, and December. We were gathering information from other anti-doping organizations. We were reviewing it, having our scientists review it, and we were trying to determine what the right thing to do would be in this situation. Given what we knew about Mr. Jones, given what we knew about his test history, and given what we knew, or what we understood the behavior of this metabolite was in other sports and other athletes, and how it was staying in the system for such a long period of time. And so, as soon as we were able to be confident in our understanding of how to interpret those results, is the moment that we provided those notifications on those results and how we were handling them.
And was UFC involved in that process or study and discussion of this new pattern of M3 results that looked, out of ordinary?
Not to my knowledge. USADA is independent from the UFC, and all of my discussions about how to handle this did not involve the UFC.
Okay. But they were first notified in writing on December 6th, I believe, was what you responded.
Yes.
That would imply that there was conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be precise, and I'm trying to remember back to early December, and I think there may have been a phone call prior to the letter that I maybe alluded to the fact that this letter was coming, and I don't have a very clear memory of what exactly was said, but I vaguely remember there being a phone call shortly before the letter went out.
Do you feel that you had, and maybe I'll even give you, I'll throw you a layup and say in hindsight, that there was potential obligation to notify the California Athletic Commission based on the timing of their hearing?
USADA was not notified of the date of their hearing. So before that letter went out, and my understanding was that they didn't have jurisdiction over those test results. However, the Nevada State Athletic Commission did not either. However, because of the upcoming fight in Nevada at the end of December, out of courtesy and abundance of caution, USADA went ahead and notified the Nevada Commission of these results so that there would be a preview of this is still in the system. You know, this may impact how the fight proceeds at the end of December, so we wanted to make sure that the Nevada Commission had as much notice as we could provide about this issue as soon as we came to our own understanding of what was happening.
And we do appreciate being included in that document and communication. I know that Dr. Eichner provided us some guidance that they've been studying over the last 4 or 5 years this potential for this long-term metabolite to continue to show up. And I think outside of grain of salt in the Olympic swimming pool, the new word is pulsing around this situation. Can you provide any information on behalf of USADA as why this has never come up before until now, at least on behalf of our commission?
I don't want to step into Dr. Eichner or Dr. Fedoruk's territory, but my understanding of it from the outside, with relating to the scientific aspects of it, are that testing is becoming more advanced and more sensitive. And in addition to the M3 metabolite, there was a recent study published related to clomiphene, showing that this can occur as well. So I don't know that it is limited to one substance, and based on the sensitivity and the frequency with which athletes are being tested, I think more data is being collected from which to understand, sometimes for the first time, how these metabolites are behaving at very, very low levels within the body.
Thank you. I may have more, but I want to give my fellow commissioners